The story that I want to tell you today, it's a story that has passed into legend now. And really, so many of the details with the story are lost to the annals of history, really. And how I came to know of this story, you will never know. And I will go to my grave with this. It starts on a sunny Thursday afternoon around a coffee table. A group of maturing ladies are having their regular monthly meeting. Maturing, yes, because they are of a variety of ages and not just mature ladies. They met as a book club, but in reality, they spent a lot of time chatting, talking nonsense, gossiping, and praying for each other. So this is what they did. This particular Thursday afternoon, around about 2:28 p.m., the tea was flowing, biscuits were plenty, and conversation was easy. But unfortunately, it was not meant to stay this way. And what actually led to this little confession or tasty bit of tea, no one will actually be able to tell you. But out of the blue, this beautiful, sweet 80-year-old lady sets her coffee cup down on the table in front of her, and for some unknown reason, she blurts out, "I have sex with my husband every single day, and it's been that way for years." And it's at this moment that people start choking on their dry biscuits, and that the tea starts to run a little bit cold as they stare in disbelief at this 80-year-old lady. The biscuits have turned stale, conversations at a lull, and the tea is just not going down the same. You see, the story is true, and while I've added a bit of flavor to it to spice it up, it is true. And I know at this moment, there's some woman sitting here going, "What? Every day? What? 80 years old?" And I know there's some men doing the same. It's true. Is this a relevant story? Well, yes, but it's also just a good story, right? You see, the point is for all of us, as we think about sex, whether you're a newly married couple or you've been doing this for 80 years and you're letting loose every single day, it is a fundamental part of our lives. And while today's passage doesn't necessarily talk about all that sex has to offer, nor does it unpack what the biblical narrative says about sex on the whole, it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the complex relationship we as people have with sex. I do pray that the Lord will use today's sermon to light a fire in your relationships, to affirm your choices and decisions, or at the very least, Lokia, to excite you for what the future holds if you choose to get married. I know it's an awkward conversation, but I'm here for the ride, right? That's for sure. Ooh-wee. Okay, here we go. I've got a couple of disclaimers that I'd like to throw out there for this. I have to. One of the things that's important about understanding this text is that you cannot remove it from the entire context of Corinth. We are dealing with a highly contextual passage. And as we've been unpacking over the last several weeks, Corinth is a messy place where sons are having, we don't actually know who, presumably their stepmother, but sort of weird and inappropriate, where men and women, or predominantly men, are finding themselves sleeping with prostitutes on the regular, where we're judging people, we're over-spiritualizing everything that we do and everything that we engage in, we got to understand that the people of Corinth seem to be striving ever upward towards spiritual experiences, viewing the body as material and bound to this world, and so they don't need to be engaged in caring too much for what happens to our flesh, because we've entered into this eschatological state of the spirit, and there's no need to worry about the flesh. See, there was an undercurrent within Corinth, sort of judgment and conditions that we set about those who are on people who are sort of bound by earthly things. And so engaging in abstinence of these earthly acts help us achieve some semblance of spiritual authority or spiritual awareness. Secondly, and this is, as I've been preparing, this is probably such a fascinating chapter because of this, right? But this entire chapter, which will be dealt with this week and next week, so yes, I'm talking about sex over 2 weeks, but it will be dealt with over this week and next week. This entire chapter doesn't carry the same kind of authoritarian weight that the rest of the book does, the letter does. And it's very unlikely, unlike Paul, to show this unique character of who he is, right? Phrases like, I make us a concession, not a command, or I have no command in this, or this is something that I'm saying, not really what the Lord is saying. It's peculiar, and it's like, well, how are we meant to interact with that? And I want to say this up front so that it's sort of engaged as we consider the text on the whole. See, Paul's offering a lot of his opinion here. But the reason that I think he does this is because I'm aware, and I think he's aware, that this topic of sex and this topic of marriage and the topic of singleness and the topic of celibacy and all of these things intertwined, there is no, apart from very foundational truths as a statement, there is no right way to do this. If you choose to be single, it's honorable. If you choose to get married, it's honorable. If you have sex in your marriage this way, it's honorable. And if you have sex in your marriage only that way, it's honorable. It's honorable, and it's all unto the Lord. And none of this is rooted in any firm law or factual statement. So this is to show that upon the firm foundations of marriage and all that entails marriage, people have a freedom in their relationships that would look different from others. In particular, sex and what physical intimacy looks like. And third, I want to say this. Paul in this passage runs, and this is unreal as I was studying this, runs completely countercultural and affirms this deep mutuality within marriage that was not seen in ancient cultures. 12 times in this passage, Paul expresses that there is this mutuality, that husbands ought to do this, so should wives. That wives ought to do this, so should husbands. And as we unpack this passage, you're going to see that this is not what I think has been the entrenched position of the church, the husband's privilege to have sex with his wife and the wife's duty, but rather this beautiful marriage of mutuality that takes place within marriage. So, that's my disclaimer. The last disclaimer is that there won't be any intense graphic descriptions of what sex is, fortunately. I won't go that far today, maybe next week. Can we go to verse 17? Verse 17. And I know you're probably going, why are we going there? Because we should start at verse 1. From verse 17 to verse 24, we find the keys to unlocking what this passage is all about. Verse 17 to 24 is in the middle of two key texts, 1 to 16 and 25 to 40, and it serves as an anchor point for both of these texts. Paul's driving home a specific point that's running against what the Corinthian church was saying. 3 times between 17 and 24, Paul repeats a similar kind of phrase. In verse 17, he says, only let each person lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. In verse 20, and he goes on after this to explain circumcision, which has nothing to do with sex, or everything to do with sex, we don't know. But at this point, nothing to do with sex. In verse 20, he says, each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. And then he goes on and he starts to explain what it means to be a bondservant and how that works in the ancient world. And in verse 24, he says, so brothers, in whatever condition each was called, there let him remain with God. Remain with God. Remain in the condition that God has called you. That is what this passage is about. That is the key to unlocking this passage. So verse 1. Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, another indication, same as in chapter 6, there is this indication that there was a correspondence between the Corinthian church and between Paul. And Paul says, now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good, their quote, for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Why is it good? What makes it good? Well, in order to understand that, we've got to go back to verses 13 and 14. Verse 13 and 14 in chapter 6 says this: food is meant for the stomach and the stomach for food, a quote that they offered. And God will destroy both one and the other. But Paul's response is, the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. This is not some superficial space that we enter into. What you do with your body matters. And so God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. One of the commentators tried to reconstruct what the letter may have said to Paul. This is not what the letter did say, but it's certainly what the letter may have said. And so it sort of goes like this. They write, since you yourself are unmarried, Paul, and are not actively seeking marriage, and since you have denounced porneia, which is sexual immorality, in your letter to us, is it not so that one is better off not to have sexual intercourse at all? After all, in the new age, which we have already entered by the Spirit, there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage. Why should we not be as the angels now? Besides, since the body counts for nothing, if some wish to fulfill physical needs, there are always the prostitutes. Whoa. You see, here again, and the truth of the matter is, this is the perceived sense of spirituality that the Corinthian church continued to carry forth and drive home as they sought to live out their faith within the Corinthian city. And so what they did was, they were fasting, they were abstaining, they were also not having sex with their spouses, and they were forcing men not to have sex with their spouses, and the women in this pursuit were also not having sex with their spouses. There was this, if you're having sex, you're giving yourself over to these base desires, and we're beyond that now. And if you really, really need to, maybe you should just go sleep with the prostitutes. So Paul's response in chapter 6 is, hold on, don't you know that if you sleep with a prostitute, you become one with her? Like, this is crazy to me. And he says in verse 1 here, now about matters which you wrote. About matters which you wrote. It's good for a man not to have sexual relations with his wife. Paul turns and goes, yeah, but there's a problem here. One of the key underlying problems within this narrative is that temptation is common to all men. And that men, speaking for men and myself, temptation towards sexual immorality has a very strong pull. Where addiction to pornography is on the rise. We look at what Nathan said 2 weeks ago, and there's this rise among women as well, where they get addicted to pornography, but this has somehow been silenced or cast to the side. Well, we don't talk about that, do we? And yet it's a very real struggle and a real challenge that women do face. Sexual immorality, addiction to pornography, is common to all men. The unique thing about the word sexual immorality here is it's actually written in the plural. Sexual immoralities. And Paul is sort of saying, like, certainly the ongoing sexual activity within the Corinthian church, giving themselves over to the prostitutes, is a problem. But Paul has a broader view of sexual immorality on the whole. He doesn't define what that looks like. And contextually, we stick within his definition. But Paul's perspective is, in order to combat sexual immorality on the whole and the temptation that is common to all man, let each man have sex in all its glory with his own wife. And let each wife have sex in all its glory with her own husband. I wrote here, and I wrote it very, very purposefully, because there is this idea that, well, if a woman withholds sex from her husband for whatever reason, not as a punishment, okay, but if the man's like, come on, are we ready to go? And the woman's like, no. And there is this thing where the man would maybe find himself doing the wrong kinds of things and go, well, you put me here because you wouldn't have sex with me. But the reality of it is that I wrote here that it's possible within the Corinthian church that people were depriving each other of sex and thus creating spaces where their spouses felt to succumb to temptation. But they didn't force their spouses into those sexual activities. And so in this, and in the sexual immorality, Paul's sort of saying, in the most explicit way he knows how, each person should have their own husband and their own wife, and they should have sex with them in all its glory. He says one caveat, no sharing, please. Each one should have their own. He goes on and he unpacks this. He says the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. I don't know what translation Jane was reading. I think it's an NIV, but an older version, I presume, an older translation. Yeah, printed quite a while ago. Because that said it wrong. I'm sorry, it did. The Greek in that was wrong. It said that the wife does not have control or possession or authority over her own body only, but the husband does as well. That's not what it's saying. It's saying the wife does not have ownership of her body. The husband does. And the husband does not have ownership of his body. The wife does. Paul's writing something very explicit and very confrontational here. There is this mutuality here, this language that Paul uses here that wants us to be confronted by what he's saying. He's saying, hey, you have duties to fulfill as a husband and a wife, and one of those duties is sex. And it's engaging in sexual activity. But I do think to leave it at that in the Greek is to miss the nuance of what Paul's trying to grasp within this text. To leave it at that, as the English sort of does, and you're like, wow, that's hectic to read, you miss what he's saying. He's saying three things that are vitally important to this text. First, his emphasis is not that this becomes a whip that you hold over your spouse, but rather the emphasis is placed on you as the individual going, you have the debt, and in this relationship, you're saying, I owe you a service. Not you owe me a service, but I offer myself up to you freely as a possession that you are able to take control of. The second thing that Paul wants us to do is he calls attention to this beautiful fact that when two people engage in sex, they are submitting to each other freely. The Greek idiom to have, and this idea and this notion that was written in ancient Greek culture where Paul was writing in, the idea with sexual intercourse was that there was this mutual submission that I bring myself into your possession and you are free to do as you please, and vice versa. I know that rubs you up the wrong way, maybe. But what I'm trying to get at is the mutuality that is found here. I'm not free to do as I please. I allow you to be free to do as you please. And the balance of that is found as these two come together, that both are trying to outdo one another in the space of intimacy, in giving themselves over to the other. My body is your free possession. Not me saying, your body is my free possession. It's different. The mutuality here is a husband does not have authority over his body. That word only in the NIV is not there in the Greek. A husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. It's not that the wife takes ownership, it's that the husband gives it. There's a difference. And this is what happens in sex. We're also, I think, astounded by what Paul doesn't say. Sex is not just a means for procreation. It's not. Sex is a tool to blow off steam. It is, and it's allowed to be. I know many traditionally would be like, no. Maybe not in this church, which is a blessing. So maybe I'm just saying the obvious for you guys. But for many, sex has been viewed as this tool that says, hey, you have sex to multiply and control and subdue the world. I'm saying you can have sex because it's fun. It is taxing sometimes. It is. It is a challenge sometimes. But sex is not just the space where it's like we've got to fulfill some duty to God here. See, it's in this intimate space when couples freely offer themselves to the other that deep connection begins to take place. That together, this is Paul's whole drive, together they are able to combat sexual immorality. Does your husband struggle with pornography? Do you struggle with pornography? Is this not something you've even spoken about with as a couple? If you haven't, I would suggest you do, because there's a way to combat it. And the way that you combat it is together. When we offer ourselves wholeheartedly to the other, intimacy begins to take place. So Paul invites us or encourages us to invite intimacy into our marriage as a means of combating immorality in our personal lives. Now, at this point, you might turn around and say to me, easy thing to say, Nick, so easy, but something wholly other to practice. I'm moody, he's tired, the kids are nuts, work's a trudge. I barely have enough energy to get through the day. Now we've got to get hot and heavy with each other? No, thank you. Right? Yes? No? Ooh, you guys are quiet. See, I agree. I never said that intimacy is easy. I never said that sex just happens. In many ways, actually, there's this divide between men and women that we've got to cross, that we don't get right all the time. Where women need, and I'm talking in generalizations, this is not all women, okay? You may go, that's not me, that's fine, I agree. And same goes for the men. In general terms, women need this emotional connection, the stirring emotionally to find themselves at a place where they are able to enjoy what sex looks like. Men just need to see you naked and we're fine. So there's a bridge. And the reality of the bridge is that men have work to do. And I think that's unfair. But men have work to do. I don't think it's unfair. Intimacy takes work. And for men, we do play on a physical space. And ladies, you do have to understand that and cross that bridge. You do. And for the ladies, there is this emotional component that's carried into this. And men have to work hard at setting aside the logical, physical nature of what it is that sex is and bridge that gap to meet them emotionally. And as this journey happens, as the hard work of intimacy takes place, we get derailed. When our son or our daughter's lost it all and it's like, well, that's not it, right? Or when you wake up in the morning and you're just about to get good and going and your child walks in and it's like, oh man, we were there, but we're not anymore. It takes work, it takes energy, it takes effort. I don't have teenagers yet, but I'm sure that's something wholly new to experience when you're like, they shouldn't hear us. This will scar them for life. I haven't experienced that yet. I'm honestly feeling like, well, let them get scarred. That's my current opinion. But there is all of these things that are at play in this process. That's a challenge for us. But I truly believe that it's worth it. It's worth the hard work. It's worth the effort to get there, and it's worth the cleanup afterwards. It's worth all of it. It's worth it. You've got to work hard at bridging that gap. Because only together, and this is something that I've only discovered this week. I think I knew and put into practice before, but I never explicitly was able to say this. It's only together that you're able to overcome the immoralities that you face personally. The temptation that's knocking at your door consistently. I face it consistently. Are you going to let me in? Are you going to open up to a moment of pure sinfulness? It's only when Ash and I walk together in intimacy, not just sex, right? Sex is a great tool that drives intimacy, but not just sex. It's when we walk together in intimacy that when immorality comes knocking, I'm strong enough to go, not today, brother. It's crazy. But in the face of life's busyness, I believe intimacy is worth fighting for in our marriages. And I think I'm going to say it, and this is maybe harsh, but since coming to Australia and sort of investing in the lives of people here and having my life invested in, I am confronted by the lack of physicality between people who are married. I am confronted, and I get maybe some of you are different, and I appreciate that, and it's not a judgment. I'm confronted by the lack that there is between people that are married going, this is my wife, this is my husband. No one else's. They're my possession. I take ownership. Mine. I'm confronted by it. I'm confronted by it. So Paul says in verses 5, do not deprive one another. Do not withhold debt. The other word that's used here in sexual terms is do not defraud one another. I couldn't believe it. And then he says, if you really want to be spiritual, except perhaps by some agreement for a limited time. Okay, if you want to go pray, like fine, if that's spiritual for you, do it. You see, there's this perhaps thing that he offers in the Greek that's like, right, I'll make this concession for you. And that's why verse 6, he says, I say this as a concession because it's not a rule. It's not a rule. Many years ago, early in our marriage, I used to, if I was preaching on a Sunday, I didn't preach as often back then, so it was great. But if I was preaching on a Sunday, Saturday night, we were not allowed to have sex. No touchy. Stay your side of the bed. Leave me alone. And she's like, why? I'm joking. I'm joking. She was probably like, yes, a break. No, that's probably what it was more like. Years ago. But it was this ongoing conversation between Ash and I. She was like, hold on, you're over-spiritualizing something that doesn't need to be over-spiritualized. And fortunately, that no longer applies in our marriage, yes. But we need to be careful that we don't make things idols that don't need to be idols. Prayer is good, but so is sex. Pray without ceasing. I'm not going to say have sex without ceasing, but enjoy sex in the process. Like, it's not one or the other. Paul here in this instance is making a concession to the hyper-spiritualized expression of faith that the Corinthian church was wanting to practice. Paul is going, all right, if you have to stop to pray, make sure that it's mutual. Make sure that both of you agree. It's not the husband going, hey, woman, I'm fasting, leave me. Because you are not your own. She owns you, and you own her freely. And I know that's confronting. But that's what Paul is saying. Give yourself as a possession to the other person. Offer yourself freely. And I know that many of you are probably sitting here in a marriage that you're going, I don't want to touch him. Or the men are avoiding home for whatever reason. But if you are dedicated to what God calls a marriage, you need to work on reconciling yourself to that place that God has identified. Now, there's a lot more that I actually have to say. A lot more. And this is why I put this chapter 7 into 2, because there's so much here that I don't know what else to do with it. But I do want to say that was a lot about marriage, a lot about sex. But Paul writes and he says, I wish that all were as I myself am. Paul was a single guy choosing to be celibate and serving God with all that he was. That was his choice. And there's a reason why he says this in this chapter that I'll get to next week. But he says this for a purpose and for a reason, and I will touch on it. But his point is, and he says, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. Paul says that his celibacy and his devotion to God is a gift to the church. It's a way of life that he's chosen to live out that is a gift to the church. And that celibacy and wholehearted to commitment to God, not given over to the challenges that we face as parents or that we face as spouses, is something that the church is able to look at and try and emulate. But people often miss the second half of this, and that is marriage is also a gift to the church. That the intimacy that a husband and a wife are able to carry within their marriage and the love that they're able to show one another is often a model of what Christ looks like as he engages with his church. And so when we look at married couples, the person who is celibate, who is wholeheartedly dedicated and committed to what God has called them to be, they can look and go, man, that is intimacy, and that is what I get to enjoy with God. And that's what I've chosen to enjoy with God. Remain as you are. That's okay. But if you are married, and if you are enjoying the fruits of what that marriage is, know that that too is something that when you look at someone who's chosen to be celibate, you can look and go, oh, that is a life that is devoted to God. And that is what I desire to emulate within my own life. Not going to get it right. I got kids to raise and a wife and a husband to make happy. This is going to be tough. but I've got a model of what total commitment to God looks like. Both are a gift to the church, and both are beautiful expressions of relationship to God and His church. So, I'm going to end there. I'm going to give you an application. That's half my sermon. The other half of my sermon's gone. Yeah, I'm going to end there. So what am I saying? What am I saying? I'm saying go home and have sex. That's what I'm saying. Enjoy it. Relish in it. Have fun. That's what I'm saying. Be intimate and continue to work at being intimate. Sex is not intimacy. Sex is a tool that helps guide us to be intimate. Sex is not intimacy. Remember that you are the free possession of your spouse. Enjoy what that means. Wives, it is your privilege to own and have possession of your husband. Husbands, it's your duty to have sex with your wives. And husbands, it is your privilege to have possession of your wife. And wives, it's your duty to have sex with your husband. Both and. Mutuality. The nuance in it is complex, for sure. That's what Paul's getting at you. And if you are single or dating or anywhere in between that stops you from currently having sex, which is a wonderful act, but you recognize this desire within yourself, I want to say that that desire is God-given. It's not wrong. But like the book of Song of Solomon, don't awaken love before it's time. Hold out. That desire is a challenge to control. It is. I've been a teenager. Most of us have been teenagers. We all know. I say most on purpose. Some of you have been old souls. It's okay to feel that desire. That is God-given. Wait until the fullness of that desire can be expressed in marriage. It's a beautiful thing. I'm saying that whether you're married or whether you're celibate, they are gifts from God that model the unique elements of God's great desire for His church. And finally, I'm saying whether you are married, whether you are widowed, whether you are divorced, whether you are unequally yoked, this is all the rest of the sermon, but it's important. Whether you are single or whether you are celibate, remain in the manner in which God has placed you. Because neither of those states create more or less spirituality within your life or access to the Spirit. God desires that you are intimate with each other. But more than that, God desires to be intimate with you. Remain as God has called you. Can I pray? Oh, Lord. I pray for the marriages. I pray for husbands and for wives. I pray for them, Lord, as they are newly married. I pray for them, Lord, as they've hit key markers and milestones. I pray, Lord, that you would stir them toward intimacy, toward one another, that you would renew afresh within their hearts, within their minds, that they are not their own. And may you help them freely give themselves over to those whom they love and to whom they belong. May you bless the marriages, but Father, may you also bless those who are single and choose to be so. Bless those, Lord God, who are single and desire for a partner. May you open the way for them as well, Lord Father God, so that they may express and enjoy the fullness of who they are in you. In Jesus' name, amen. It just occurred to me right now as I was praying that Paul in chapter 6 says, you are not your own. You were bought with a price. You belong to God. And in chapter 7, he goes on to say, you are not your own. You belong to your spouse. Ladies, you belong to no other men but God the Father and your husband. Men, you belong to no other woman, and you are accountable in a real deep way to no other woman but God the Father and your wife. That's it. It's a beautiful thing, I think.